Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Rev'd Up for Sunday. We are the clergy of St. Mark's Episcopal Church. My name's Elizabeth Garnsey.
I'm Peter Walsh.
I'm Justin Crisp.
And we're looking again at the upcoming Gospel for Sunday. And now we are on to Easter 7. And this is a passage from the high priestly prayer that Jesus prays over his community. And so I think we're just flies on the wall in this one. So let's hear the text, and maybe you'll see what I mean. John 17, verses 20 to 26. John prayed for his disciples, and then he said, I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. As you, Father, are in me and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I in them and you in me, that they may be completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that those also whom you have given me may be with me where I am, to see my glory, which you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Righteous Father, the world does not know you, but I know you, and these know you that you have sent me. I made your name known to them, and I will make it known, so that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. Gospel of the Lord. So we have Jesus in a state of prayer throughout this whole passage. What do you make of this?
Well, I think I'm with you that we are flies on the wall in the sense that Jesus here is wrapped in prayer, right? And the disciples themselves are flies on the wall of his prayer, right? His conversation with the one that he calls Father. I just wrote I just wrote like a kind of like how-to guide for prayer. I mean, it's it's like a paragraph, right? This is for a prayer book that we're going to potentially send out with our pastoral pup Francis on visits that Francis makes, and so it can be left behind for people. And I just in case somebody's like, oh my gosh, I don't know how to pray. I don't know what praying is. It has like a little paragraph. How to pray. What is prayer? And my idea about prayer is one that I got from my favorite theologian, Hans von Balthasar, well known to those of you who follow the podcast, perhaps annoyingly so. But von Balthasar says that prayer is entering into the conversation of God with God. That the Trinitarian persons are, as it were, already in a conversation with one another all the time. And all that we're doing when we're praying is we are entering into the innermost parts of ourselves where God dwells, right? Which is one of the themes that we spoke about in the podcast last week. It's one of the themes of the farewell discourse, beginning in chapter 14, going through 16, as well as the high priestly prayer here in chapter 17 of John. We go into the innermost parts of ourselves. We center ourselves there, literally in a certain sense and metaphorically, and we enter into the dialogue of God with God, which is always ongoing. So in that sense, we are flies on the wall, just as the disciples were, right? This is Jesus making explicit and saying out loud the heart-to-heart that he's having his whole life with the one he calls Father. I think that's part of what's going on. In another sense, we're not flies on the wall, because this whole prayer is about us, just as it was about the disciples who were there, just as it was about the Johannine community in the context of which this gospel emerges, right? So in the first line, I ask not only on behalf of these, ostensibly the disciples who are around Jesus, overhearing his prayer over them to the one he calls Father. I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may all be one. Meaning that all of these people, his disciples, and also those who will come to believe in him through the disciples' word, will all be one with each other in some thick spiritual sense, I think. This is the unity of the church across time and space. Is what we're talking about in the baptismal covenant in the Episcopal Church when we say, will you continue in the apostles' teaching and fellowship, in the breaking of bread and in the prayers? And I love the line fellowship. So the apostles' teaching is one thing, right? But the apostles' fellowship is another, right? We're supposed to have this intimate spiritual connection with these people, right? And this is what Jesus is asking the Father for right here at the beginning of this passage. Of course, those who will believe in me is in some sense it's immediately the Johannine community to which and in the context of which this text is written. But I think the Gospel of John has higher ambitions even than that, right? The Gospel of John's ambitions are not simply to address the Johannine community, but also to address us, whoever it is who's reading this text. This is Jesus. This is our overhearing Jesus praying that we might be one with his disciples. I think that's just what's going on in the first, and that's just some of what's going on in just the first verse of this passage.
Yeah, it's like cheesecake, isn't it? I mean, one bite is super intense, and I think that the number of times Jesus talks about one. I think one of the ways I think about this is, again, John is a mystical gospel. Over 50% of people in the United States say that they've had some mystical experience of some sort, the so-called mountaintop experience. And for those of you who've had mountaintop experiences, one of the characteristics of that is a deep sense of communion and union with yourself, with God, with the world around you, and that it all is in some sense one, and you're at peace with that oneness here. And I think here we get a window into Jesus' spiritual life and the communion and union, the oneness, the mystical union that he has, and he wants that union to be shared broadly amongst these his people. And so his prayer is, as you're quoting von Balthasar, that we might participate in his union and communion with God, and in this case, it's with the Father. The Spirit is not part of this transaction right now, though we might say that the union is in the Spirit, right? Mm-hmm. So that the Spirit, the one named, is part of this union and communion, and so we get this mutual indwelling, which is like the Russian dolls. I don't have any of those anymore. I don't know if we used to have some. Where you take the top off and take off, and there's another doll, there's another doll, there's another doll, and that we're part of the Russian doll set here, right? So we are in all this, and all that's in us, depending on where that is, and so that is. That's kind of what it's all about. So we got booted out of the gospel. I mean, we got booted out of the Garden of Eden, right? And all hell broke loose. That was a comment in a essay when I taught the Kent School kid at English as a second language. And I said, what happened with the garden? To retell the Garden of Eden story. And he said, well, Adam got kicked out of the garden. Adam and Eve got kicked out of the garden, and all hell broke loose. And I laughed because I thought, well, you're not supposed to write that in an academic essay. But and that's not exactly what I taught, but in certain ways that's what happened. And
so true.
And so here is what this is about, is if we lost intimacy with God in the Garden of Eden, here the prayer is for the return of union, communion, and intimacy, this overwhelming oneness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard to read this without a twinge or a great overwhelming wave of sadness and scandal. That even Jesus' prayers are unfulfilled to this moment in many ways, not altogether, but if unity is this high good that Jesus is calling it, the church has failed miserably. I mean, there's no bigger scandal in the church than our fracturing and all throughout history, and I think that it goes to show that it's not the institution that is the church, it's the Spirit moving through the institution and outside the institution that is the presence of God going on, and we participate in that or not. But the idea that we would fight each other and try to kill each other and snuff each other out or, win over each other, it's just the opposite of this prayer. So, wow. I mean, if anything, this is a very convicting passage to me that, wow, again, I'm reminded that that we just have a long way to go. And I mean, there's no, it's not over, but I just think it's heartbreaking how human we are, and that it takes all these thousands of years to continue working at it. I have to say, I don't know if we give Elizabeth I enough credit for, her ability to hold together these warring factions in England to create the Anglican way, and bring Catholics and Protestants together under one umbrella around one table. I mean, that blip in history was so powerful, and it hasn't always held tight, even in our own communion. But, I think that's the litmus test to our church. Who's welcome around the table? Who's welcome to preside at the table? And, that's what we fight over. And so Jesus is calling us to be a holy communion, a holy one around one table, around one name with one love. It's really powerful what he's saying and how far away we are from it. So anyway, not to cast a shadow over the entire conversation, but I do think it needs to just be named and realize that Jesus is talking about us. He's not just talking about those disciples overhearing him, that they could all hang together as one tight-knit friendship team, This is big. It's much bigger than that.
I'm really glad that you said that, because I do, if you take Jesus at his word, in the Gospel of John particularly, he would be scandalized at the disunity of the church, the visible disunity of the church, right? I think there's no way around that. I'm a big fan of Elizabeth I. I do, Elizabeth I wasn't perfect, right? We call Mary Bloody Mary, right? Elizabeth's Catholic half-sister. It's partly because history is written by the winners, right? And certainly under Mary's reign in Tudor England in the 16th century during the English Reformation, there were, there's certainly a lot of blood shed, right? A lot of people convicted, a lot of people martyred for their Reformed or Protestant religious beliefs, including the first Protestant Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, whose words, some version of which we all use in as Episcopalians and Anglicans around the world. But under Elizabeth's reign, under the Protestant heyday, the Protestants killed people too, right? Nobody comes out unscathed, as it were. But I do think that the Elizabethan project, the Anglican project of unity in essentials and freedom in non-essentials, is, for me anyway, the best shot of the visible church at visible unity. And I think that in the ecumenical movement, in the limited successes that we have had towards achieving visible unity in the visible version of the unity, the spiritual unity which Jesus is describing in this passage, it's been because we've looked at some version of unity in essentials and freedom in non-essentials. A lot to say about that, because I'm actually this past weekend I was at the celebration of the ministry of one of my mentors, a pastor named John Tiro, who is a minister of the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America, who is my campus minister, and the Episcopal Church and the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America have a full communion agreement. And so this was a joint Episcopal Lutheran campus ministry, and John, my Lutheran pastor, is a huge reason of why I became an Episcopal priest. And that's a beautiful but limited, move in the right direction, as it were. I think that one of the things that I take from this passage is that the unity of the church is a divine reality, is a divine gift, is a divine grace. So whenever I don't say that to let me off the hook of visible unity, but it does console me that we may have an underlying spiritual unity, which is a reality brought into being by the one Jesus calls Father, by the power of the Spirit whom Jesus sends to us, by the power of Jesus' own prayer, which I don't think ends right after chapter 17 of the Gospel of John. I tend to think that Jesus is still our great high priest and is still praying to the one he calls Father in the Spirit, and so on. This is a divine reality that is breaking into the world with the rest of the healing of creation, which, Peter, you were talking about, right? the rest of the ways in which God is making God's home among us again, in a new and powerful and fresh way, in the way which God always originally intended. And speaking of original intentions, I have to say this line about "you have given me," I desire that those also whom you have given me, the disciples, and also those who are going to believe in Jesus through the disciples' word, may be with me where I am to see my glory, which you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. And so here in this passage, we go all the way back to the prologue of John's gospel with "in the beginning," right? Which I just had a great conversation with a budding Johannine scholar in our congregation, Brandon Schweitzer. Brandon is a man of great holiness, a person most devoted to the Kent School, which Peter mentioned. And Brandon is a real student of theology in this season of his life, and he's reading William Temple, the former Archbishop of Canterbury's commentary on the Gospel of John, and had this whole conversation about what "in the beginning" is. Is it the moment? Is it a moment? Is it like T-1? Or is it the eternal moment which precedes all moments? Is this Jesus saying, "You loved me before the foundation of the world," and giving us a kind of a window into the life of the Trinity, into the love with which the Father loves the Son in the Spirit before the foundation of the world, as in the eternal moment before all moments, not exactly just in like the first second of creation. Anyway, going all the way back to that "in the beginning" thing, we've got the whole cosmic vision of the Gospel of John, repeating itself over and over and over again, and repeating itself here even in the high priestly prayer.
Wow. That's a lot.
It's like cheesecake, right?
It's a lot. It's a lot. Yeah.
It's intense. Every verse is intense.
Yeah, and on the question of what is that they might be one, is that the same thing as unity? I'm not clear that that's the same thing as unity. No doubt that when the ecumenical movement was in its full flourishing in the 1960s, this was the basis of the desire for Christian denominations to lean into their similarities, their Elizabethan solution here, to lean into what they had in common versus not what they had not in common, and so I do think the passage is important on that. Also, I'm reminded that when Jesus, again, such a labyrinth of interconnectedness in the gospel, that previously when he talks about being one, the oneness is always filled with the echo of the Father and the Son oneness, and that spiritual unity, that what is trying to be revealed is knowledge of God, true knowledge of God, and what is trying to be revealed in the gospel is true knowledge that Jesus is sent from God and reveals God the Father, and that it says here, we got the mission statement, so that the world may believe that you sent me, so that the world may know that you sent me. So what is the purpose of the oneness? So we are entering into a Jesus's communion and union, and in that we get knowledge of the divine. We get knowledge that the spiritual world is real, and we get knowledge that Jesus reveals the spiritual world, and that if we can have that true knowledge, then we can be witnesses that will allow the world to see and to know and to believe, because in seeing, knowing, and believing there is life. I mean, this is all super uber connected. And but it's not easily digested, and assuredly, the disunity that you spoke of is. If you're following the podcast, you've heard me refer to the most recent research the Episcopal Church has done about what non-Christians think of Christians, and it ain't great. I'll just leave it at that. And so our witness, whether or not it's disunity or whether or not it's that we haven't lived up to the word, we haven't lived up to the love that Jesus has, we have not brought others to see and to know the Father, to know the truth of the Son, because we have been lacking in that. But I would say, with all that said and its complications, and perhaps some of you 20 minutes in have absolutely no idea what we're talking about, that underneath it, that there is a spiritual unity that is the gift of God, the gift of the Spirit, because we are nothing with, this is a spiritual story. This is not a story of flawed human beings screwing things up. This is ultimately a spiritual story. And the church, as a manifestation of the life of Jesus and the life of the Father, is a gift to us. And so I do believe that there is an essential unity, that we do not have glasses, we don't have eyes to see, that underneath all, that there is. And we may well, as Jesus said, don't grieve the Holy Spirit. We may well be grieving the Holy Spirit all the time, given your foray into our disunity. But I do believe that underneath it there is a unity.
Yeah, I feel like the mission of the church is to make God known in the world, to be the presence of Jesus in the world. So, yeah, in that sense, we can do that in our pockets of the world, in our corners, and regardless of the unity with all the other denominations and so on, they do it in their way, in their language, and I see that ultimate union. God can speak many languages and in many cultures, but I think that if there is that overarching union or invisible connection, it's way more than only the church. I think God, wants us to see that everything is connected. We're supposed to see ourselves connected with everyone, every creature of God. And, if anything, the church is supposed to, be the exemplars of that union. And that's why it's a scandal, because, how do we make that known if we ourselves cannot love one another? And it doesn't mean agree on our clothing or our sacraments or our rituals. It means how do we not bludgeon each other?
Well, which we are, by the way, bludgeoning each other. So I was recently in a conversation with somebody. I dropped by to say hello, and he said to me, "Hey, man, I got to talk to you." And I said, "Okay." He said, "What do you?" He said, "I'm really upset. The Christians are killing the Christians. The Russians are Orthodox. The Ukrainians are Orthodox, and they're killing each other. What do you think God thinks of that?" That was his hello comment to me. So we are literally bludgeoning each other, not just verbally in disagreement from ecclesial standpoints.
Yeah. Right. So anyway, I guess that's more what I was getting at is. I do believe that we are connected invisibly one to another, beyond transcending just we Christians and we the church. I think that God, before the foundation of the world, God loves the Son. God loves the incarnation of God's Word. And so that is everything that God
John's
has made.
gospel always bristles with you, right? So John in his community is always talking about this. It seems too insular for your for you. I mean, this has come out through the podcast. So several times you have said, "Wow, this is bigger than just the Christian church. It's bigger than just followers." It's big.
I like to think John is saying that too. I mean, John's preaching to a community in struggle and in crisis and needing to emerge as, have with this glimpse of glory and God that they've been given, this brush with eternity and the incarnate Word, that's their charism. But I think that in the prologue to John, it speaks to what I'm saying, that in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and with God, and through all things came into being through the Word. Period. So that's where I feel like I'm totally on board with John, where it becomes a separatist, little special enclave of this privilege. That's where I just get annoyed. I can't, and not just me. I'm not like I have a bigger understanding than anyone else, but I do think that it's important for us to remember that much larger cosmic context that all of it flows out of. And I think Jesus is returning to that, as the logos of God. It's so much bigger than institutional church that really is so tiny in the world comparatively, So,
yeah, the way that I would put the distinction that you're making is the difference between the invisible church and the visible church, which is a long-standing theological idea, and one which, I mean, we talked about the Elizabethans, right? The great theological architect of the Elizabethan Reformation was, or the Elizabethan settlement, right? This attempt at a broad church. Was Richard Hooker, and Hooker made a huge deal out of the difference between the church invisible and church visible. So I'm with you that like the church is a whole lot bigger than St. Mark's Episcopal Church, even if, or St. Michael's Lutheran Church down the street, or the Congo Church there. We got the Congo, we got the Congregationalists back here. Rob Schwartz, our very own local Anglican Puritan, he's always holding us responsible, holding our feet to the fire. Right, a lot of jokes to be made about that, but I'll keep going here. It is. I do think that God is at work in. I mean, I think that the local church is one of the ways in which God saves the world. I really do believe that. And yet I also think that it's a whole lot bigger than just that, and the church can never be reduced to just the local church, right? Or the local Christian community, that kind of thing. I think that the scandal of the Gospel of John is that it is universal. I mean, you get the Logos, but the Logos being this divine principle of reason which informs, which is the pattern according to which the entire world is created, right? This is not an original Christian idea. It's a Stoic idea. It's a Platonic idea. It's from Greek philosophy. And that the Logos is universal, right? It's totally universal. And the Logos became flesh and dwelt among us in this one guy. So it's the universal in the particular. And it's John's refusal to give up either side of that. The idea that the universal is present in this one historical dude, right? And this one historical dude's life is not over when he dies, right? But the life which is being worked out after him by the power of this advocate whom he sends is still his life. It never ceases to be his life. It never ceases to be the life of Jesus, this one random dude who lived in the first century. The power of John, the power of Christianity is its refusal to divide the universal from the particulars, to say, yep, universal in this one guy, this guy, and in this guy's life, which is not over when he dies, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it never ceases to be his. This life, the universal always has a name, and the universal's name is Jesus. And you can't leave out any part of that sentence for John's vision, I think.
Well, in some circles, they say the universal is the Christ that's in Jesus. You know, Jesus the Christ is the universal. Jesus is the particular. And then when he's, raised and transcends this physical, or, becomes more so, that's the universal. And people get confused that Christ is Jesus' last name, but it's a whole different entity of the way of speaking of the anointed one, the Christ, the Christos. In that context, we can talk about him as, always the particular and the universal united. Mm-hmm. And in order that and through this explosion of him, re-entering the cosmos, as it were, in his ascension, taking us with him and remaining with us here. I mean, that's the kind of mind-blowing sense that, we're all in it. We are all one in that particular, and one with him in the universal. We just lack the eyes to see and experience that. But is that, maybe I've missed...
No, I don't think you missed anything. I mean, I agree with so much of what you said. I do dissent, and here I'm gonna come out publicly on YouTube, so it's gonna be here forever and ever and ever. As somebody who disagrees with Richard Rohr, right? So, oh my gosh, my whole career's over. But I happen to find, as a theologian, my position would be that the distinction between Jesus and Christ, right, which I take it, I can see it to a certain extent, right? You've got a particular thing, right, the historical Jesus. Then you have, after his death, his resurrection, however it is that you understand it, you've got a universal Christ, right? I find that distinction between Jesus and the Christ to be an artificial one, which is not incredible. I mean, perhaps it's a current in the tradition. I find it to be fairly artificial. I know that you could find some scriptural grounding for it in the letter, which is we don't know if it's written by Paul for sure. It could be written by Paul. It may not be written by Paul. It's in that in-between category, right, where scholars debate whether it's Paul himself, but it's the letter to the Colossians where you get this vision of the cosmic Christ.
Right.
But I think, regardless of whether it's Paul or not, this cosmic Christ, yes, sure, is cosmic, but it's always an extension of the historical incarnation of the guy named Jesus.
Unless you read the prologue to John.
Well, but the prologue to John is all about how the Logos, the divine principle of reason, has been made flesh in this one guy, Jesus. The Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth, et cetera, et cetera. So I really bristle against the attempt to get rid of either the universal character or the particular character.
But the whole point is not to get rid of either one. On that, we totally agree.
On that, we totally agree.
The prologue is, in the beginning was the Word was with God, in God. That's the universal.
Yeah.
That precedes everything that's happened in the person of Jesus. So it's not just after
Oh, wow.
the person, the incarnation, the moment of incarnation. I don't understand what you're reacting to.
Historically, okay, Peter, do you want to?
I didn't say historically.
Peter. I can see that it historically precedes it, right? As in, like,
No, I'm not talking about historically. I'm saying supersedes. Like, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, in God, dwelled in God.
Yeah.
The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus.
Yeah.
That's the universal. The universal is that in the beginning, he is.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll tell you the reason why I worry about this. The reason why I don't want for there to be a universal that's not revealed in this historical guy, Jesus. The reason why I want for the universal's name to always be Jesus and not just Christ, and why I'm uncomfortable with the idea that there's something which supersedes the historical incarnation of Jesus, is because I have this suspicion God is a serial killer. Okay, if you look at the world, and you think God created this world, I have to say I want nothing to do with this God. Looks like this God makes Holocausts to happen, makes et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I don't actually believe any of that stuff. I don't believe that that's actually the way that God works in the world. I don't believe that because of Jesus, and because the God who's revealed to me in Jesus shows me God is not a serial killer. God would not work in that way. God would not make a civilization act in such an uncivilized way that they put people in gas chambers just because of their ethnic and religious identity, right? But the only reason why I know that for sure is because I know Jesus. And if Jesus is not all of God, if there's any residue of God behind Jesus, I'm worried that residue is going to show me God's a serial killer.
But are you saying that before Jesus, God was a serial killer? No, we're saying that people understood God better when Jesus arrived, became incarnate and
Right.
revealed God as the heart of love, the way of love, the path of peace, and nonviolence. But there's a God active and working in the world before the first century, which, the prophets understood.
Oh, totally.
And foretold that, we would understand better.
Yeah.
God said to a prophet, I will write my word upon your hearts and your spirit. Jesus was necessary. We couldn't get the message through the prophets up until Jesus, we who believe in this mode of communication from God. Mm-hmm. But I don't believe that God changed. I believe that humanity evolved to understand, to be ready to receive a person like Jesus, particular manifestation of God in that way. But by no means do I believe God's revelation is limited to Jesus' incarnation. By no means. I will stand by that, even as a Bible-beating, preaching Christian priest, that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life for all time and eternity, and was made manifest to us in the particular person of Jesus. But God is always the same. We evolve to understand God, and I think Jesus, came to show us what God is like. And how are we doing? How are we doing? So I'm not really disagreeing with you in this universal and particular paradox or whatever it is. I'm just saying that the oneness, the unity, the union that Jesus and the Father have, he wants to have in us, so that we can be in that. Mm-hmm. It's for everyone, not the Christians, not just the church. I believe this is for everyone, everything. So I think I'm not making myself
No,
very clear.
no, that's good. That's really good. No, I think we're putting the emphasis on a different syllable. And I think I am more comfortable saying that, I think maybe the difference, we'll see if this is actually the difference, if I'm hearing you correctly, is that perhaps I am more comfortable. So I would agree that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life for everybody, not just for people who call themselves Christians. But perhaps I'm more comfortable than you are saying that to the extent that a Buddhist, or to the extent that someone who is ostensibly an atheist, to the extent that a Muslim has an experience of God, that Jesus is actually their way, their truth, their life, and they're simply not naming it. Am I more comfortable than you are in saying that particular sentence, or is that the difference?
I think you're more comfortable saying that
Yeah.
than I am.
That may
That's
be
okay.
where we actually disagree. But otherwise, I'm with you, especially on the knowing thing, right? Especially on the knowing thing. I'm with you that knowledge of God evolves through time, and it's not like people just didn't know God before the first century. I completely agree. In the order of being, I think Jesus is untranscendable.
Let me put it
In the
this
order
way.
of knowledge, I think that our knowledge evolves and changes, and
Yeah. I would like to think that if Jesus were here today, he would be having conversations with Buddhists, Muslims, Jews.
Sure.
He is a Jew.
Yeah.
Let's not forget, Jesus
Totally.
was a Jew, and came through the Jewish people and race. And so I think that the way he lived and conducted himself was to show God transcended even their laws that they abided by, and felt that that's how they knew God, was through keeping the law. And they still do. Many Jews do. And so that's wonderful. And there's love in that. I mean, the goal is love. The goal of every religion is to point us to God. Jesus came to point us to God. So I think that God has many ways of speaking to God's creation. And so, we make our path just one step at a time to understand. And I don't need to have the last word, but I do know that we're almost out of time. And I do want to point out that we are very united in our love for one another. And we struggle. And I think it's important to talk about all this because it helps me grow, it helps us grow.
Same here. Our love for each other is the condition of the possibility of our having conversations like this one.
Exactly.
Which I wish and I would hope would break into every part of every crook and cranny of the church and every crook and cranny of our culture. Right.
Into that.
Nah, you're good on that.
You want to have a last word, Peter?
I don't think I need the last word. I just say that was far-ranging and deep and in so many ways incredibly beautiful. It started in one place where you were talking about, just to even say what happened there, you were talking about the cosmic Christ versus Jesus, were these two different elements, or what was the particularity and the unity, and then referring to how it was described in some sense in the Godhead, and a little with an allusion to the biblical story, and then it moved into the questions of revelation, and then it moved into the question of the role of Jesus in salvation, touching on that in the way, in the truth and life as the path, exclusively or inclusivity, again, back to who's the story for. And I would say that we would be unified in our understanding that in all the universality and all the particularity, that Jesus is a man for all people, for all seasons, not necessarily in the ways of exact devotion, but certainly in the cosmic consequences of who he is, who he was, and who he continues to be, and his role in the divine plan for salvation. That we would hold to that, I would think, and we would also hold to the divinity of being expressed, the divine being expressed in other religions and other lifestyles, knowing and unknowing, without any need for our cosmic Christ, our Jesus, to be imperialistic on any other religious understanding of the divine. So we can also, as Christians, as complete in followers of Jesus, hold it in such a way that we can hold the universality of the particular and not beat people up with it, and not be arrogant in our knowledge.
Amen.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us this week, and we'll see you in church. Please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Have a great week.